It's important to remember the lessons of the past to build a better future.
My name is Betty Johnson, and I'm 74 years old. Most folks around Millbrook, Tennessee knew me as the woman who raised 3 children alone after my husband passed, who volunteered at the church every Sunday, and who never missed a family gathering. I thought I knew what heartbreak was when I buried my dear Harold 15 years ago. I was wrong. The real heartbreak came from the daughter I sacrificed everything for. The same daughter who would one day look me in the eye and call me a disgusting old hag in front of my own grandchildren. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. Back when I still believed that love and sacrifice were enough to keep a family together. It was a crisp October morning in 2023 when my world started crumbling. I was sitting in my favorite rocking chair on the front porch, watching the maple leaves dance in the autumn breeze, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my daughter Lisa's name, and my heart immediately lifted. She rarely called anymore, always too busy with her high-powered job in Nashville and her new husband, Trevor. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, trying to keep the loneliness out of my voice. "How are you doing?" "Mother, we need to talk." Lisa's voice was cold, clinical. No greeting, no warmth, just straight to business, like I was one of her corporate clients instead of the woman who had rocked her to sleep every night for the first 5 years of her life. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" I asked, though something in her tone made my stomach twist. "Trevor and I have been discussing our financial situation, and we've decided we can't keep sending you that monthly check anymore. You're going to have to figure something else out." Would you believe what happened next? Stay tuned to find out how this conversation changed everything between us forever. The monthly check she was referring to was the $800 she'd been sending to help with my mortgage and medical bills since Harold died. It wasn't charity. I had helped pay for her law degree, her wedding, even the down payment on her first house. But more than that, it was the only connection I had left with my youngest daughter, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me I was her best friend. "Lisa, I don't understand. Did something happen? Are you and Trevor having financial troubles?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Financial troubles? Mother, Trevor just made partner at his firm. We're buying a second home in the Hamptons. We simply don't see why we should keep subsidizing your lifestyle when you could easily downsize or move into one of those senior communities." The words hit me like a physical blow. Subsidizing my lifestyle? I lived in the same modest 3-bedroom house where she had grown up, where Harold and I had built a lifetime of memories. The house where I nursed her through chickenpox, helped her with homework at the kitchen table, and celebrated every milestone of her life. "Sweetheart, this house isn't just a house to me. It's where your father and I—" "Oh, please, spare me the sentimental speech. You're 74 years old, living alone in a house that's far too big for you. It's time to be practical. Sell it, move somewhere smaller, and stop depending on your children to take care of you." After Lisa hung up on me that day, I sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours. The woman I'd just spoken to couldn't possibly be the same little girl who used to bring me dandelions and call them sunshine flowers. The same teenager who had promised me at her high school graduation that she'd never forget where she came from. The same young woman who had held my hand at her father's funeral and sworn we'd always take care of each other. But people change, don't they? Sometimes they change so much that you wonder if you ever really knew them at all. I tried calling my other children, David, my eldest, and Susan, my middle child. David lived in Colorado with his wife and twin boys, working as a park ranger. He was always strapped for cash, but had a heart bigger than the Rocky Mountains. When I told him about Lisa's call, the silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Mom, I wish I could help more. he finally said, and I could hear the guilt in his voice. But with the boys starting middle school and Karen's medical bills from her surgery last year, I know, sweetheart, I would never ask you to choose between your family and me. Susan was even more direct. She ran a small bakery in Memphis and was barely keeping it afloat after the pandemic. Mom, Lisa makes in a month than I make in a year. If she's cutting you off, there's something else going on. She's not the same person she used to be. That night, I lay in the bed I had shared with Harold for 42 years, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of it all. When had Lisa become so cold? When had money become more important to her than family? I thought back to all the sacrifices Harold and I had made to give our children a better life than we'd had. But this was just the beginning of my nightmare. What Lisa did next would shock you even more. We had grown up poor in rural Alabama. Harold worked double shifts at the factory while I cleaned houses and took in sewing to make ends meet. But we had dreams for our children. Dreams that they would never have to worry about where their next meal was coming from, or whether they could afford to see a doctor when they were sick. Lisa had always been the ambitious one. While David was content to spend his days hiking and fishing, and Susan was happy creating beautiful things with her hands, Lisa had her sights on bigger things. She was valedictorian of her high school class, graduated summa cum laude from Vanderbilt University, and finished in the top 5% of her law school class. Harold and I were so proud. We attended every graduation, cheered from the audience at every ceremony, and never missed an opportunity to brag about our successful daughter to anyone who would listen. We had sacrificed our own dreams. Harold never got to open the woodworking shop he'd always wanted, and I never went back to school to become the teacher I'd dreamed of being. But seeing our children succeed made every sacrifice worth it. Or so we thought. 3 weeks after that devastating phone call, Thanksgiving arrived. For 47 years, our family had gathered at my house for the holiday. I would spend days preparing Harold's mother's recipes, the cornbread dressing that had been passed down for 4 generations, the sweet potato casserole that was everyone's favorite, and the pecan pie that Harold used to say was better than anything money could buy. This year felt different from the moment I started planning. David called to say they couldn't afford the plane tickets for him and his family to come. Susan was working. The holidays were her bakery's busiest time. That left Lisa and her new family. I should have known something was wrong when she arrived 2 hours late with store-bought sides still in their plastic containers. Trevor, her husband of 2 years, walked in like he owned the place, immediately complaining about the outdated decor and asking if I had any real wine instead of the sweet Moscato I'd bought special for the occasion.
But it was my grandchildren, Lisa's 8-year-old daughter Amber from her first marriage, and Trevor's 10-year-old son Tyler, who broke my heart that day. They walked into my house like strangers, glued to their phones and tablets, barely acknowledging my existence. "Amber, sweetheart," I said, opening my arms for a hug. "Grandma Betty missed you so much." She looked at her mother uncertainly. Lisa was scrolling through her phone, not paying attention to any of us. "Mom says we don't have to hug people if we don't want to," Amber said quietly. "That's right," Trevor interjected, not looking up from his own phone. "We don't force physical affection in our household. It's about boundaries and consent." I tried to hide my hurt. These children used to run to me, used to fight over who got to sit in my lap while I read them stories. Now they were strangers in the house where they had once felt completely at home. What happened next at dinner would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about my own daughter. Dinner was a disaster from the first bite. Trevor criticized everything. The turkey was too dry, the gravy was too salty, the rolls were store-bought instead of homemade, which wasn't true, but I didn't have the energy to argue. Lisa said nothing to defend me, just sat there checking her phone and occasionally nodding in agreement with her husband's complaints. The final straw came when I served dessert. I had made 3 different pies, just like always: pecan, pumpkin, and apple. And as I was cutting slices, I mentioned how much your grandfather had loved my pecan pie, how he used to say it reminded him of his childhood in Georgia. Could we please not do this sentimental memory thing? Lisa said, not even looking up from her phone. We get it. Dad's dead. You miss him. But some of us are trying to enjoy our meal without the constant guilt trips. The room went silent. Even Trevor looked uncomfortable. Amber and Tyler continued playing on their devices, completely oblivious to the tension. I felt like I'd been slapped. Lisa, I wasn't trying to. Yes, you were, she snapped, finally looking at me with eyes that seemed to belong to a stranger. You always do this. Every family gathering, every phone call, every conversation somehow becomes about how much you've sacrificed and how much you miss Dad and how ungrateful we all are. The silence that followed Lisa's outburst was deafening. I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the same clock that had marked time through decades of family celebrations. Harold had wound that clock every Sunday for 30 years, and I had kept up the tradition after he passed. Now it felt like it was counting down the seconds until my family completely fell apart. Lisa, honey, I never meant to make anyone feel guilty, I said, my voice shaking. I miss him, and I miss when we were all together and happy. Right, she rolled her eyes dramatically. There it is again, the poor widow act. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to constantly worry about your feelings, to walk on eggshells because, God forbid, we say something that might remind you that Dad is gone? Trevor was nodding along now, emboldened by his wife's cruelty. You know, Betty, Lisa has told me about how you manipulate the family with your sad stories and guilt trips. It's really not healthy for the children to be exposed to that kind of emotional manipulation. I felt the blood drain from my face. Manipulate? I would never. Lisa, is that really what you think I do? What I think, Lisa said, standing up and throwing her napkin down on the table, is that you need to grow up and stop acting like the world owes you something just because your husband died. Plenty of people lose their spouses and don't spend the rest of their lives making everyone around them miserable. The words hit me like a freight train. This was my daughter, my baby girl, talking to me like I was nothing more than a burden, an inconvenience in her perfect new life. Lisa, please, I whispered, tears starting to blur my vision. I know I'm not perfect, but I've always tried to be a good mother to you. I've always put you kids first. That's when she said it, the words that would echo in my mind for months to come. You won't believe what came out of her mouth next. It changed everything between us forever. A good mother, Lisa laughed, but there was no warmth in it. A good mother doesn't guilt her children into taking care of her for the rest of their lives. A good mother doesn't make every conversation about herself. A good mother doesn't sit around in this dusty old house feeling sorry for herself and expecting everyone else to feel sorry for her too. She paused, looking around the dining room where we had shared so many meals, so many birthdays, so many holidays. The same room where she had done her homework while I cooked dinner, where she had told us about her first job, her first apartment, her engagement to her first husband. You want to know the truth, Mother? You've become a disgusting old hag who can't let go of the past. And frankly, Trevor and I are tired of pretending otherwise. We're tired of your neediness, your constant demands for attention, your pathetic attempts to make us feel guilty for having our own lives. The words hung in the air like poison. Amber and Tyler were still staring at their screens, but I could tell they were listening now. They had just heard their stepmother call their grandmother a disgusting old hag, and neither of them even looked up. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. At 74 years old, I had survived the death of my parents, the struggles of raising 3 children on very little money, the heartbreak of losing my husband, and countless other challenges. But nothing had prepared me for this moment. The moment when my own daughter looked at me with pure contempt and reduced me to nothing more than an old woman who had outlived her usefulness. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Lisa was already gathering her purse and coat. Don't worry, we weren't planning on staying anyway. Come on, kids, let's go home where we can actually enjoy the rest of our holiday. As they filed out of my house, Tyler looked back at me for just a moment. For a split second, I thought I saw something in his eyes. Maybe confusion, maybe sadness. But then Trevor called his name, and the boy hurried after his family, leaving me standing alone in my dining room with the remnants of a Thanksgiving dinner that no one had enjoyed. The weeks following that disastrous Thanksgiving were the loneliest of my life. I had always been a strong woman, had to be, raising 3 children mostly on my own while Harold worked long hours to support us. But Lisa's words had cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. They replayed in my mind constantly. Disgusting old hag, pathetic, manipulative. Was that really how my daughter saw me? Had I become the bitter, clingy widow she described? I spent hours looking in the mirror, studying my reflection, wondering if what she said was true. My hair had gone completely gray, and I had gained weight since Harold's death. My clothes were practical rather than fashionable. Maybe I was disgusting. Maybe I had become everything she accused me of being. But then I would remember the sacrifices Harold and I had made for our children. The times we went without new clothes so they could have name-brand shoes for school. The way we drove our old car for 15 years so we could afford to help Lisa with law school. The countless nights I had stayed up sick with worry when they were teenagers. The unconditional love I had given them through every triumph and failure.
I tried calling Lisa several times, but she wouldn't answer. I sent text messages apologizing, explaining that I never meant to be a burden, asking if we could talk. She finally responded with a single message. I need space. Please stop contacting me. David called me a few days before Christmas, his voice heavy with concern. Mom, Lisa told Karen and me what happened at Thanksgiving. She said you had some kind of breakdown and started screaming at her and Trevor. My heart sank. David, that's not what happened at all. She called me terrible names. She said I was manipulative and... Mom, he interrupted gently, I know you miss Dad, and I know it's been hard since he passed, but maybe Lisa has a point about you needing to move forward. Maybe it would be good for you to sell the house and move somewhere with other people your age. This was the moment I realized my own children believed her lies. But what I decided to do next would shock them all. Even my own son was taking her side. Even David, who had always been my gentle, understanding boy, believed that I was the problem, that I was some kind of bitter old woman who couldn't let go of the past and move on with her life. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done trying to convince my children that I wasn't the monster Lisa had painted me to be. I was done apologizing for grieving my husband, for missing the family we used to be, for wanting to hold on to the memories we had built in this house. If Lisa wanted space, I would give her space, but not the kind she was expecting. I started with small changes. I stopped calling her. I stopped texting. When she finally called me 2 weeks later, probably expecting me to be grateful for the crumbs of attention, I didn't answer. When she called again, I let it go to voicemail. Mother, it's Lisa. I know you're there. Pick up the phone. We need to discuss your living situation. Trevor found some really nice assisted living facilities that we think would be perfect for you. Call me back. I deleted the message without listening to the whole thing. Then I did something I hadn't done since Harold died. I called a lawyer. Robert Patterson had been Harold's best friend since childhood. They had grown up together, served in Vietnam together, and been each other's best men at their weddings. Robert was semi-retired now, but he still took on cases for friends and family. Betty, he said warmly when I called, it's so good to hear from you. How are you holding up? I need to change my will, Robert, I said without preamble, and I need to do it quickly. There was a pause. Betty, are you sure this is something you want to do right now? I know the holidays can be difficult, and sometimes we make decisions when we're emotional that we later regret. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied. Meeting with Robert was both heartbreaking and liberating. I had to tell him everything about Lisa's cruelty, about the way she had spoken to me, about how even my other children seemed to believe her version of events. Robert listened without judgment, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. Harold would be devastated to know how Lisa has treated you, he said finally. He was so proud of her, but he would never have stood for this kind of disrespect. That's why I need to do this, Robert. Harold and I worked our whole lives to build something to leave our children, but Lisa has made it clear that she sees me as nothing more than a burden, an inconvenience she has to deal with until I die. If that's how she feels, then she doesn't deserve to benefit from our sacrifices. The process took several weeks. I had to have everything documented properly, witnesses brought in, all the legal requirements met. During that time, Lisa called me twice more, both times leaving increasingly frustrated voicemails about my childish behavior and demanding that I call her back so we could discuss my future. I didn't call her back. Instead, I started making other changes in my life. I began taking better care of myself, got my hair done for the first time in months, bought some new clothes that actually fit properly, and started eating regular meals again instead of just picking at food. I also started volunteering at the local food bank, something I had wanted to do for years but never had the time for when I was constantly worried about managing my children's feelings. It was at the food bank that I met Dorothy Chen, a 68-year-old retired teacher whose husband had passed away 3 years earlier. Dorothy had what I was beginning to recognize as a quality I had lost somewhere along the way: self-respect. My daughter keeps telling me I should sell my house and move into one of those senior apartments. She says I'm rattling around in a house that's too big for me. But you know what I told her? What? I asked, genuinely curious. I told her that I earned the right to rattle around wherever I damn well please. That house represents 40 years of marriage and hard work, and I'll leave it when I'm good and ready, not when my daughter decides it's convenient for her. Dorothy's words opened my eyes to something I hadn't realized. I had given Lisa way too much power over my life. Dorothy became a good friend over the following weeks. She helped me see that I had been so focused on not being a burden to my children that I had forgotten I had rights too. The right to live in my own home, the right to grieve my husband in my own way, the right to expect basic respect from the people I had raised and loved. The mistake we make, Dorothy said one afternoon as we shared coffee after our volunteer shift, is thinking that we have to earn our children's love by being perfect, by never asking for anything, by disappearing quietly when they decide we're an inconvenience. But love isn't supposed to be conditional like that. She was right. I had spent the months since Harold died trying to be the perfect mother, the grateful widow, the woman who never complained or asked for too much. And what had it gotten me? A daughter who called me a disgusting old hag, and children who thought I was manipulative for missing my dead husband? 3 months after that terrible Thanksgiving, my new will was finalized. I have left everything to David and Susan with specific instructions that Lisa was to receive nothing. I also included a letter explaining my decision to be read after my death, detailing exactly what happened and why I had made this choice. But that wasn't enough. I realized I didn't want to wait until I was dead for Lisa to understand the consequences of her cruelty. I wanted her to know now, while I was still alive, what she had lost. I decided to host Easter dinner, just like I had done every year for decades. I sent invitations to all my children, including Lisa. David and Susan both called to accept, sounding relieved that I seemed to be feeling better. Lisa didn't respond at all. 2 days before Easter, she finally called. "Mother, I got your invitation. I'm surprised you're having dinner after your little tantrum these past few months." It wasn't a tantrum, Lisa. I was giving you the space you asked for.
Well, Trevor and I have discussed it, and we've decided to give you another chance. We'll come to dinner, but there are going to be some ground rules. No talk about Dad, no guilt trips about the past, and no emotional manipulation in front of the children. I took a deep breath. Actually, Lisa, I need to tell you something. I've made some changes in my life over the past few months. Changes that affect you. What kind of changes? Her voice was sharp with suspicion. I think it would be better if we discuss this in person. Will you come to dinner? There was a long pause. Fine, but I'm serious about those ground rules, Mother. One step out of line and we're leaving. What I had planned for that Easter dinner would give Lisa the shock of her life. Easter Sunday arrived bright and beautiful. I had spent the morning cooking all of Harold's favorite dishes, not because I was being sentimental, but because they were my favorites too, and I was done apologizing for the things that brought me joy. David and his family arrived first, followed by Susan and her teenage daughter Rachel. The atmosphere was warm and relaxed in a way it hadn't been in months. David's twins, now 13, actually put down their phones long enough to help me set the table. Susan brought homemade rolls from her bakery, and even though they were having financial troubles, she had somehow managed to buy me a beautiful bouquet of spring flowers. "Mom, you look great," Susan said, hugging me tight. "I was worried about you after what Lisa said happened at Thanksgiving, but you seem like yourself again." "I am myself again, maybe more myself than I've been in a long time." Lisa and her family arrived an hour late, as usual. Trevor immediately began his familiar routine of criticizing my housekeeping and asking invasive questions about my finances. Amber and Tyler ignored everyone, as had become their custom. But Lisa seemed different, more nervous than usual, less confident. "So, Mother, what are these changes you mentioned on the phone?" I smiled at her, and for the first time in months, it was a genuine smile. "Well, for starters, I've been volunteering at the food bank. I've made some wonderful new friends there, people who understand that being a widow doesn't make you a burden or a manipulator." Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "That's nice. I've also been taking better care of myself, getting my hair done, buying clothes that fit, eating regular meals. Funny how much better you feel about yourself when you're not constantly worried about being a disappointment to your children." The room was getting quieter. David and Susan were exchanging glances, sensing that something significant was happening, but not sure what. "But the biggest change," I continued, serving myself a generous portion of sweet potato casserole, "is that I've updated my will." The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. Lisa's fork clattered against her plate as she set it down, her face going pale. Trevor stopped mid-chew, his eyes narrowing as he realized this conversation was about money. Even the children seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. "Your will?" Lisa asked, her voice carefully controlled. "What kind of updates?" I took a sip of my sweet tea, savoring the moment. For months, I had felt powerless, diminished, reduced to nothing more than an inconvenience in my daughter's life. But now, for the first time since Harold's death, I felt like I was in control of my own story. "Well, you made it very clear at Thanksgiving that you don't want to be burdened with taking care of me or dealing with my emotional needs. You called me manipulative, pathetic, and what was the exact phrase? Oh, yes, a disgusting old hag." David's mouth fell open. "Lisa, you said what?" "Mother, you're taking that completely out of context. Listen." But I held up my hand. "Let me finish. You also made it clear that you and Trevor are doing very well financially. You're buying a second home in the Hamptons, Trevor made partner at his firm, and you certainly don't need my $800 a month anymore. So I decided you probably don't need your inheritance either." The color drained completely from Lisa's face. "What exactly are you saying?"
I'm saying that I've removed you from my will entirely. Everything I have, this house, my savings, Harold's life insurance money, his pension benefits, it's all going to David and Susan now. The explosion that followed my announcement was unlike anything our family had ever seen. Lisa shot up from her chair so fast that it fell backwards, crash into the floor. "You can't do that. This is my house too. I grew up here. You can't just give away my inheritance because you hurt my feelings." "Actually, I can," I said calmly, continuing to eat my dinner as if we were discussing the weather. "It's my house, my money, and my decision, and I've decided that children who call their mother a disgusting old hag probably don't deserve to inherit anything from her." Trevor was on his feet now too, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. You're punishing Lisa for being honest with you, for trying to help you move forward with your life." "Honest?" I laughed, and there was no humor in it. "Is that what you call it when you tell someone their grief is manipulative? When you reduced a woman's 40-year marriage to sentimental memory things? When you make her feel ashamed for missing her dead husband?" David was staring at Lisa with a mixture of shock and disgust. "Lisa, how could you say those things to Mom? She just lost Dad 2 years ago. She's still grieving." "Oh, don't you start to," Lisa snapped. "She's been playing the poor widow card for 2 years now, and I'm sick of it. Some of us have moved on with our lives." Susan stood up slowly, her face flushed with anger. "Moved on? Mom didn't just lose a husband, Lisa. She lost her partner of 42 years, the man she built a life with. And instead of supporting her through the hardest time of her life, you called her disgusting?" "I called her disgusting because that's what she's become, sitting in this old house, clinging to memories, expecting everyone to tiptoe around her feelings forever. It's pathetic." That's when David did something I had never seen him do in his 35 years of life. He walked over to his sister and looked her straight in the eye. "Get out," he said quietly. "Excuse me?" I said, "Get out. Get out of Mom's house and don't come back until you're ready to apologize for the cruelest thing I've ever heard anyone say to their mother." Lisa left that day in a rage, screaming threats about lawyers and family court, dragging Trevor and the confused children behind her. Her final words before slamming my front door were, "You'll regret this, you miserable old woman. You'll die alone, and it'll be your own fault." But as I watched her car speed down my driveway, I didn't feel miserable at all. For the first time in months, I felt free. David and Susan stayed for hours that evening, helping me clean up from dinner and asking me to tell them everything that had happened at Thanksgiving. When I recounted Lisa's words, all of them, Susan started crying. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I can't believe she said those things to you, and I can't believe I let her convince me that you were the problem." "How did she convince you?" David shook his head in shame. "She called me right after Thanksgiving and told me you had some kind of breakdown. She said you started screaming at Trevor for no reason, that you were becoming paranoid and hostile. She made it sound like you were losing your mind."
She told me the same thing, Susan added. "She said you accused her of being ungrateful and that you threw them out of the house for trying to have a normal conversation about your future. We were worried about you, Mom. We thought maybe grief was affecting your judgment." It was a masterclass in manipulation, and I had to admit that Lisa was skilled at it. She had managed to completely rewrite the story, making herself the victim and me the unstable aggressor. If I hadn't stood up for myself, if I hadn't forced the truth into the open, my other children might have believed her version forever. But the real test was yet to come. Lisa wasn't going to give up without a fight. Over the following weeks, Lisa launched what I can only describe as a campaign to destroy my relationships with the rest of the family. She called my sister Ruth in Florida and told her I was showing signs of dementia. She contacted David and Susan repeatedly, telling them I was being influenced by new friends who were probably trying to take advantage of me financially. She even called Harold's brother Tom and suggested that I was dishonoring Harold's memory by turning his children against each other. Tom, bless his heart, called me immediately to warn me about what Lisa was doing. Betty, I don't know what's gotten into that girl, but she's not the Lisa I remember. The Lisa I knew would never speak about her mother the way she's been talking about you. Lisa also made good on her threat to contact lawyers. I received a formal letter claiming that I was mentally incompetent and that my decision to change my will was evidence of diminished capacity. The letter demanded that I undergo a psychological evaluation and threatened legal action if I didn't restore Lisa's inheritance. That's when I called Robert Patterson again. Betty, I've been practicing law for 40 years, and I've never seen anything quite this vindictive, he said after reviewing Lisa's lawyer's letter. She's essentially arguing that you're too mentally incompetent to decide who gets your own money. Can she do that? Can she force me to give her an inheritance? Robert laughed grimly. Not a chance. You're sharp as a tack. You made your decision for clear, documented reasons, and you have every right to leave your money to whoever you choose. But I think we should be proactive about this. His suggestion was brilliant. He arranged for me to be evaluated by a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in assessing mental competency. Dr. Sarah Williams spent 3 hours with me, conducting memory tests, cognitive assessments, and detailed interviews about my decision-making process. Mrs. Johnson, you are one of the most mentally sharp and emotionally healthy 74-year-olds I've ever evaluated. Your decision to change your will shows excellent judgment and a clear understanding of consequences. If your daughter tries to challenge this, I'll be happy to testify on your behalf. 6 months after that Easter dinner confrontation, Lisa's legal challenges had completely collapsed. Her lawyer had quietly withdrawn from the case after reviewing Dr. Williams' evaluation and realizing they had no grounds for claiming mental incompetency. Lisa's campaign to turn the family against me had also backfired spectacularly. My sister Ruth flew in from Florida to visit me, and after spending a week with me, she was furious at Lisa for trying to convince her I was losing my mind. Harold's brothers and their families rallied around me, offering support and expressing their disgust at Lisa's behavior. Even some of Lisa's old friends from high school reached out after hearing rumors about what was happening, telling me they were appalled by her treatment of me. But the most important change was in my relationship with David and Susan. They had both been dealing with their own guilt about believing Lisa's lies, and they were determined to make it up to me. David started calling me twice a week, and he and his family visited more often. Susan brought me fresh bread and pastries from her bakery every Sunday after church. More importantly, they both started talking to me like I was a person with my own thoughts and feelings, not just a grieving widow who needed to be managed and protected. They asked for my advice about their own problems, shared stories about their work and their children, and included me in their plans for the future. I continued volunteering at the food bank, where I had found a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Dorothy and I had become close friends, and through her I had met other women who had survived difficult family situations and come out the other side stronger. As for Lisa, she made one final attempt to reconcile about a year later. She showed up at my door, unannounced, on a Saturday morning, without Trevor or the children, looking tired and older than her 38 years old. "Mom, can we talk?" she asked. I invited her in and made coffee, just like I had done thousands of times before. But this time was different. This time I wasn't desperate for her approval or terrified of saying the wrong thing. What Lisa said next would determine whether our relationship could ever be repaired. I've been thinking about what happened, about the things I said at Thanksgiving and Easter. I know I hurt your feelings, and I'm sorry about that. I waited for her to continue, but she seemed to think that was sufficient. "Lisa," I said finally, "do you remember calling me a disgusting old hag?" She flinched. "I was angry. I said things I didn't mean." "Do you remember telling me that my grief was manipulative? that I was pathetic for missing your father? Mom, I just think, do you remember hanging up on me when I tried to explain why this house means so much to me? Or telling David and Susan that I was losing my mind? Her face read red. I was worried about you. I was acting differently, and I thought maybe you needed help. I looked at my youngest daughter, the little girl I rocked to sleep, the teenager I supported through heartbreaks, the young woman I celebrated with at every milestone, and I realized that she still didn't understand what she had done wrong. Lisa, I don't think you came here to apologize. I think you came here because you finally realized that I'm serious about the will, and you're hoping you can say just enough to get your inheritance back. That's not true, she protested, but her eyes told a different story. I think it is true. And you know what? That's okay. I've learned that I can't control how you feel about me or what you choose to do with your life. But I can control how I respond to the way you treat me. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where Harold and I had planted roses together 30 years ago. They were blooming beautifully this spring, better than they had in years. Your father and I didn't work our whole lives building something to leave you so that you could use it as leverage to treat us with respect. Love shouldn't have to be purchased. Respect shouldn't have to be earned through inheritance. She was crying now, but I wasn't sure if it was from genuine remorse or frustration at not getting what she wanted. I want to have a relationship with you, but it has to be a relationship between equals, built on mutual respect. If you can't see me as anything more than a burden or an obstacle to your happiness, then maybe it's better if we don't have a relationship at all. She left that day without agreeing to anything, and I haven't heard from her since. It makes me sad sometimes, but it doesn't devastate me the way it would have a year ago. I've learned that I can't save a relationship by myself, and I can't love someone into treating me with respect. David and Susan have both told me that they're proud of how I handled everything. They've also said that watching me stand up for myself taught them important lessons about setting boundaries in their own lives. As for me, I'm happier than I've been since Harold died. I'm still sad about losing Lisa, but I've gained something more valuable, my self-respect. I know that I'm not a burden or a manipulator or a disgusting old hag. I'm a 74-year-old woman who loved her husband, raised her children the best she could, and deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. And if that's too much to ask from my own daughter, then maybe she never deserved my inheritance in the first place. I still live in the same house where I raised my children, where Harold and I built our life together, but now it feels like home again, instead of a museum of grief. I've redecorated some rooms, planted new flowers in the garden, and filled it with friends who appreciate me for who I am. And every Sunday when I wind that old grandfather clock, I think about Harold and smile. Not because I'm trapped in the past, but because I'm grateful for the love we shared and the strength it gave me to build a future worth living. Thank you for joining me on this journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimately redemption. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest, but we always have the power to choose how we respond to that hurt. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to cut off a family member who was toxic to your well-being? In the meantime, on the final screen, I'm leaving you with 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until now.